My name is Heidi Hautala, and I'm an experienced European lawmaker, close to 20 years in the European Parliament, and I also was Minister for International Development of Finland 10 years ago. But I've been very much involved in the supply chain legislation in the EU, including the EU Deforestation Regulation. And I believe that some of us were there to trigger this legislative developments that have now been confirmed. And so now it's all about implementation. And after my career in the European Parliament, I'm still very much involved in the business and human rights work. It was pretty obvious that if one wanted to stop the detrimental, even disastrous deforestation, one should look at the consumption in rich countries. Because on cocoa and chocolate, we know very well that it's a luxury product. Most of it is consumed in the very most affluent countries. So there was this understanding that close to 10% of deforestation worldwide may be caused by European consumption. So this was a part of this kind of new inspiration where we're not only looking at the precise product as we have it for consumption, but also the supply chain all the way down to the origin. And then in the EU deforestation question, the EU Commission around 2019-2020 decided to introduce this legislation, which is a part of let's say, a kind of a combination of three different laws which have a similar type of inspiration and impact. The second one is the EU ban on imports of products produced with forced labor, which has just been finally adopted now. And as in a horizontal way, we have the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which puts the strict obligation on bigger companies to make sure that they don't have serious human rights violations and environmental destruction in their value chains. So indeed, but I must say that one of the main reasons why this work could start is that even to my own big surprise, some chocolate companies came to us in the European Parliament and said that despite all the wonderful certifications and labels, there still are about 12-13 million children working in the cocoa fields in Western Africa, and that there is still deforestation. Indeed, the big surprise was that they said that please, you must move on from these voluntary measures like certifications towards mandatory legislation. And I couldn't believe my ears, literally, because usually companies do not welcome legislation which gives them obligations. But in this case, the biggest chocolate companies like Mars, Wrigley, Mondelez, Barry Callebaut, and maybe a little bit smaller, but not less important, Tony's Chocolonely. They were all there to encourage us to demand this legislation. So that was the beginning. There was not enough attention to the local context. And because this was perceived mainly as a kind of an environmental law. And I would say that, let's say, the expertise from people who are experts and practitioners of development. And I mean, there has been a consequence that now that everything is already agreed and there's still the year 2025 to prepare for its implementation, then in many producer countries in the global south, there is quite a lot of concern about how do they manage to do this. And that's a big question indeed, which needs to be solved. Yeah, well, let's say that the big inspiration comes from the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And now, when we talk about human rights, I need to point out that it's extremely intimately linked with environment as well. So deforestation is both an environmental climate, but also a human rights issue, if we think about indigenous peoples. So the key three innovations in the key innovation in 2011 with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights was that while governments and states still need to carry the biggest responsibility on protecting human rights, also companies were called to respect human rights. And notably, if there would be any wrongdoings in the value chains of companies, then the victims would need to have access to justice and remedy. So here we have a kind of a, let's say, I think quite an elegant idea of labor division on human rights and environmental issues between the states and the private sector. And I think if we look at the present day situation, I think it goes without saying that the global challenges such as deforestation, poverty, climate change, and the rest, they are so severe that it's impossible to think of a situation where just the public entities would be solely responsible. I think the question that remains largely unanswered today is this question of a living wage and living income for cocoa producers. You know, the men and women, and unfortunately also children who work in the plantations, the families do not often meet what we call living income or living wage. And there I would say that so far the efforts have not been sufficient. We can also see that the companies are quite eager to discuss solutions, but when it comes to pricing, somehow they are less willing to discuss that. And I think there needs to be a lot of work done to see how this living wage and living income can be met. Yes, that was the reason why this all started, because, I could quote some figures to you that in April 2019, just prior to this legislation being born, 87% of EU citizens assured that they considered legislation necessary to stop deforestation in our consumption. So this idea of sustainable consumption is quite close to many citizens in Europe. I'm not saying this is mainstream because, you know, all those inflationary pressures more poverty, bigger inequality in our societies. Of course, many cannot afford to do this, but it should not be about price. So I think this is why we have to work double as hard to make sustainable and fair production of cocoa and other commodities available for everyone. And their companies also need to do their share. The vulnerable groups are often now in a situation where they may be smallholders in the developing world, producing commodities such as cocoa, can be also coffee or rubber, palm oil. And we see that often these smallholders cannot meet with the EUDR or other sustainability requirements in the consuming countries. And we need to really do extra much to make sure that the smallholders will not be left and sidelined from the supply chains. Here, I very much believe that it's like a big multi-stakeholder requirement now to make sure that the governments of the producing countries, they do enough to ensure what we could call enabling conditions for the smallholders to be able to trace their production. And also I think the companies can do extra much to help that happen. And then the EU can do quite a lot to help that as well. So again, it needs to be a joint effort. It was not unexpected that this would happen, because many, let's say, importers of these commodities, which EUDR touches, are quite demanding to comply with. And I think it's useful to have this kind of tools, but here again we need a government initiative, and we need, let's say, willingness by companies to share that information that is collected, so that it's not only becoming a kind of a, let's say, commercial field. And there's a word of warning about just sort of really only looking at strict legal compliance. And that maybe also was so unexpected that some companies now sort of strictly ask their legal departments to look into how to comply. Whereas I believe that the purpose and the idea of this legislation is to help fair trade, to help just living conditions for those who produce these important commodities for us. The EU Commission has declared that they will fulfill this requirement of establishing partnerships with producer countries by what they call their forest partnerships. But I agree with civil society organizations who are now saying that there's a few let's say, loopholes in this approach. For instance, while the US and the EU have already looked for years into the kind of legality of our consumption and imports of timber, now the EU is kind of leaving this legality approach behind, and I'm afraid it's a big mistake, because if we do not help the producer countries to improve their governance and the transparency and accountability of their systems, I don't think we will get very far to really solve the deforestation and help the people to earn a fair living who produce those commodities. So I think the partnerships from the EU side really need to be sort of thought through, and it's very important that they will be inclusive, that there will be full participation of workers' associations, producers' associations, producing governments, the EU Commission, and civil society from both ends. So now I think we are in a situation where we could look into what has been put forward as a kind of an example. We call it the Sustainable Cocoa Initiative, and I was pleased to be among those who triggered this initiative together with quite a, let's say, big number of different stakeholders. So that was the idea, that all the stakeholders come together to try to solve the issues, to find solutions which are fair for everyone. So much more needs to be done in terms of these partnerships, and they are really key to the success of the EUDR. And let's ask the difficult question, who pays? That is the question. And there I believe that the risk is that, again, the smallholders in the producer countries may be sidelined because their associations, and sometimes they are all on their own, they're not able to pay. So the pay question is important, and I believe that here we need the EU contribution, we need the companies to do their share. Yeah, there's one that is very puzzling. At the moment, we see that, for instance, cocoa and coffee prices are sky high, and we have been informed that one of the main reasons is that the harvests have failed in different continents, and very largely because of climate change, because of flooding or drought, and nevertheless, in these sky high prices, we do not see that the farmers themselves would have been compensated for all that damage properly. So I think this is something that is going to disrupt a lot of agricultural production in the coming years, more and more. Unfortunately, I believe that we've just seen the beginning of this disruption, and that needs to be fully in account. I mean, for instance, I'm a Finnish citizen, and the Finnish people are known to be the biggest coffee drinkers in the world. And people are sometimes now complaining about the coffee prices going up. I'm happy to pay if I can be sure that there is no deforestation, there is no child labor in the production. And the same goes for cocoa and chocolate. You remember that chocolate is a luxury product, and I've actually been shocked to understand that very, very few cocoa producers, actually, the poor farmers, ever tasted chocolate because they cannot afford it. So the world needs to be taking into account all these disruptions that we will see from the climate change. And again, it's the farmers and their associations that need to be compensated. And we as consumers also need to be ready to pay. And I don't think that we should see that all those pay rises will just go to the pockets of the big multinational companies.